It was Bobby McDonald. Now, how likely is it that Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny suffered an allergic reaction whilst in prison? He awoke in the night with what he describes a hot and prickly face, ears and neck, as if his face, he says, had been rubbed with glass wool. He has never, he confirmed, suffered an allergic reaction in his life. Now, an ally tells Newsnight he believes he was poisoned and he's not the only one. Is a pattern emerging? Gabriel Gatehouse reports.
Alexei Navalny is no stranger to arrest. He says he always keeps a bag packed and ready to be carted off to prison at a moment's notice.
He's now being arrested by police.
Over the past 8 years, Russia's most influential opposition leader has been jailed nearly a dozen times. Last Wednesday seemed, at first, no different.
Вышел из дома сегодня побегать и купить жене цветов. У нее сегодня день рождения. Юля, привет, с днем рождения. Около подъезда маленький автобус с ОМОНом, и меня задержали. Сейчас, как дурак в трусах, нахожусь в отделении полиции. Юля, так получилось, извини.
Navalny was sentenced to 30 days detention after calling for people to join an unsanctioned protest due to take place on Saturday. So far, so unremarkable. But then,
while he was in detention, he was taken to a hospital with a severe reaction on his skin and swelling of his face.
Doctors diagnosed Navalny with contact dermatitis, an allergic reaction essentially. But he says his own doctor and lawyer were not shown the diagnosis. He and his supporters believe he was poisoned. Partly to deter anyone from tampering, Navalny keeps his own soap, toothpaste and bed linen in his prison grab bag.
We believe that the toxic agent could have been administered through a pillow or through a pillowcase while he was out during a walk. Alexei has never had allergic reactions to anything before. We have a history of Russian authorities allegedly poisoning various opposition activists, and we, of course, are all aware of the Skripal case. So we believe that it's something that Russian authorities are capable of doing, and a detention center is a place where it can easily be done if such a decision is taken within the corridors of Russian power.
There's been no independent confirmation that Mr. Navalny was indeed poisoned, but he clearly has the Kremlin rattled. The trouble began earlier this month when tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Moscow after dozens of opposition candidates were barred from standing in the upcoming local elections. These were some of the biggest protests in years. In the run-up to Saturday's demo, there were nighttime raids on the homes of other opposition activists. One of the barred candidates was forcibly removed from a sit-in outside the Electoral Commission, together with the sofa she was occupying. On the day of the protest itself, as Navalny was sitting in his prison cell with his face swelling up, on the streets of Moscow, the riot police were out in force. They arrested nearly 1,400 people, one of the biggest crackdowns in recent years.
Some analysts say that this is, the beginning of the revolution. Some people say that the authorities have more than enough power to suppress these protests. I think that this case seems to me like an attempt at intimidation, and I hope it wasn't really an attempt to do something worse than that.
Putin's promise to his electorate has always been to make Russia great again. Displays of military might and wars in Ukraine and Syria once boosted his appeal. But recent opinion polls suggest his popularity has dropped, as has that of his party, United Russia. And Putin himself? What was he doing as police made mass arrests on Saturday and his main political opponent battled a suspected poisoning? He climbed aboard a mini-submersible to view the wreck of a Soviet-era submarine. Down there in the silence, perhaps, he had time to reflect on whether to double down on repression or give the opposition some of what it wants.
That was Gabriel Gatehouse. We did ask the Russian government whether they'd like to come on the programme. They haven't so far got back to us. But Gabriel is with us now. Was he poisoned then?
Well, I mean, who knows, Emily? I mean, what are the options here? Either he was poisoned, as he suspects, clearly, or he's lying and he does have an allergy, or he somehow poisoned himself. I mean, it's not clear, but we learnt today that his effective number 2 in Russia, Leonid Volkov, said he was in jail last month. They're always in and out of jail, these guys. He was in jail last month and he had a milder version of the same reaction. So he's now saying that he suspects he was poisoned as well. As I say, there's no kind of slam dunk evidence here, but, you know, the Russian government does have form here, both with opposition figures. Vladimir Kara-Murza was poisoned in 2015. He nearly died of kidney failure. Again, not clear who did it, but he was an opposition figure. And then, of course, there's the Skripal case, Litvinenko. You start putting 2 and 2 together.
And how much does this have to do with dwindling public trust in Putin that we're seeing now?
Well, it's interesting. You look at the polls. Trust, according to one recent poll, I think in May this year, was at a little over 31% in Putin. Compare that to just after the invasion of Crimea, it was 71%. Now, don't get me wrong, Putin is still by far and away the most popular politician and trusted politician in Russia. But those figures are low for the Kremlin and they get nervous. Here's how Russian democracy works, basically. You can have elections so long as the outcome is always that Putin or his party wins. Anything else is seen as an existential challenge to the status quo. Now, how do you deal with that? You either double down, as we saw here, or you give them some of what you want. And we've seen them do that as well. There were protests in Siberia over a church earlier this year, and the government acted back down. So what we see is the Kremlin in a little bit of disarray, partly because there's no plan of succession. Beyond Putin, when his term ends in 2024, nobody has any idea what to do.
Gabriel, thank you very much. Now, if you had to guess what kind of pop record would top the American charts